So, this actually happened a couple years ago to one of my friends who used to go to college at the time. Now, one of my friends at the time, I can't remember his name, but he went by the name Sheldon. Now, Sheldon was on his freshman year of college, and he, with his guy friends, decided to take a road trip for the weekend. They didn't have any school, aka college, since they were going to have a week off since it was around fall break. At the time of this story though, Sheldon and his friends were around 18, 19 years old, and they had been taking road trips for a while. This road trip was definitely one of the most horrifying things he's ever experienced. So Sheldon and his friends were driving down when they came across a cornfield. The sun was setting, so they thought they would explore the cornfield for a little bit. As they were exploring the cornfield, they were checking everything out when they all of a sudden see a clearing in the distance. At first, they weren't sure if it was a crop circle or something, but they approached it and they ended up seeing that they found a body. It looked like a body of a woman, and she looked really old and deceased. They didn't really weren't sure exact age, but she was an elderly and she had been laying there for a while. Sheldon and his friends get back in the car and they go to the nearest police station and reported this. However, when they reported it and the police arrived, the body was already gone. There was no trace of if anyone took in the body or not, but Sheldon wonders who could have taken the body and who killed that woman. That really confuses him to this day, and he still is not sure of what or who did that. But it's just a really scary thing. He wasn't really sure if there were anybody who were killers in the area, but it's definitely something that was worth mentioning is the fact that this woman looked like she had been dead for at least a day or two, but they weren't really sure how long she'd been there. It's definitely one story that Sheldon then really gets shivers to every time he thinks about this. Anyway, that's his story, and I hope you can learn from it. So this actually happened to someone that I knew from 2022. Now, they were living somewhere in Texas at the time, and they were taking a road trip to California to visit a friend of theirs. Now, my friend that I will call at the time of this story, her name was Ashley. Now, Ashley was with her girlfriend. They weren't dating or anything. They were just really close friends. And they decided to take a road trip to California to visit a friend that they hadn't seen in a couple years. So, with them driving a 2021 Honda Civic, they were driving thing down the road. As they were driving, I think it was somewhere in Nevada where it was in the middle of nowhere. It was in the middle of the night, probably around maybe 10 or 11 p.m. As Ashley and her girlfriend were driving, they all of a sudden came across what seemed to be a car. A car was on the road and it looked like it hadn't been used in a while and was pulled over. Ashley thought that maybe they were broken down, so she got out of her car with her best friend and just to see if anyone was okay in the car. It turns out there was a man who looked to be maybe in his mid-40s. Can I help you?" the woman asked. Of course, that's what Ashley said, and the man looked up. "Oh, my car broken down. Do you know where the nearest gas station is or the nearest tow truck area where someone can help me?" he asked. Ashley had no idea, so she apologized and said she didn't know. That's when her friend started to get a little freaked out. The whole situation seemed a little rashy, and it seemed really weird. What's the most weirdest thing was that inside the man's soul, it didn't seem very nice. What we mean by that is that this man looked as if he had set up a trap, and that honestly really set Ashley off. Ashley wasn't even sure about what the man was doing and why he was looking at the car if his car did break down. All of a sudden, Ashley and her girlfriend looked up to see that there was a few more people coming from the sides of the road. They were wearing ski masks and stuff, and they even had some axes and bats and etc. They went back in their car and then they drove away as fast as they could. They didn't stop until they got to the nearest gas station, where they had called the police, explained about the man with the broken down car, where it was actually located, and etc. Of course, they stayed in a motel for that day, as they didn't want to drive in the middle of the night in case if they were being followed. However, that was definitely something that really freaked them out. When the police updated them the next day, they said they couldn't find that car or the man or those people. They searched the area and patrolled the area just to make sure, but they couldn't find anyone. Needless to say that either they got away because they knew the cops would come, or they escaped with something much worse. That still frightens Ashley and her girlfriend, and they still think about this every now and then. It's definitely one story that they really had. Nothing like that has ever happened since, but the rest of their road trip turned out to be fine, and they never had any problems. But that story will always still stick in the back of Ashley's head, and it still frightens her to this day, even when she looks at it. What was the man's intentions were, they don't even want to know. But they can obviously tell that they weren't really good intentions. They weren't sure if those people were going to rob them, kidnap them, or do God knows what. But needless to say, this is when Ashley had to realize that she had to be more careful of who she's interacting with on the side of the road. You never know what could really happen. That's really something they really aren't sure. But it really frightens them to this day. They knowing that they could have potentially been harmed, but they don't really know what these guys' intentions were. It still frightens them to this day, even thinking about it. So this happened to my friend at the time of this story. This was around 2018. Her name was Charlotte, and she was taking a road trip by herself. She was going to see a friend of hers that lives somewhere in Michigan. She was driving down a deserted road when something happened. I don't remember if it was Michigan where she was going, even though I said that's around the area, but it was actually somewhere in Kentucky. As my friend Charlotte likes to do road trips, she does them whenever she can due to her schedule at work being as hectic as always. She didn't really have time for her family, but she did try to make up the best of it and do what she could to make everybody happy. Now, at the time of this story, she was around maybe 23, and she was driving down a deserted road. Of course, there was just forest surrounding the area, so Charlotte was doing her best to keep awake while driving. It was sometime around maybe 9 p.m., and as she was driving, she all of a sudden sees something with her headlights in front of her. It seemed like the last second. She let out an oh shit with slamming on the brakes so hard that the tires screeched. As soon as the car had stopped, she parked the car and got out with her knife and looked to see if there was anybody on the road. However, there was no one around. No body, no roadkill, no one was around. Since there were trees around for miles, there was no way that anybody could be around. That's when she ends up remembering that whatever it was might have been something in her imagination. She kind of remembered in the distance, it kind of looked like a person or an animal coming out of the woods. What really scares Charlotte to this day is that there was no evidence as to what it was. Could have been a person or an animal. That's something Charlotte has no idea. Nothing like that has ever happened since on the middle of her road trip, but that would always stick with her. She doesn't really do road trips at night anymore because of the paranoia that there could have been anybody watching, lurking, or do God knows what. It still frightens her to this day, not knowing what that creature was. Could have been a person, could have been an animal, who really knows? That really still sticks with her to this day, and she even wonders there's what animal or person was doing in the middle of the woods. That boggles her mind to this day, and it still does.